So I'll get us going. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Maiy Azize. I'm the national spokesperson for the Everybody's Home campaign, and I'm also the Deputy Director of Anglicare Australia. Everybody's Home was set up back in 2018 as a coalition of housing and welfare organisations to tackle Australia's housing crisis. But we've also grown now to have more than 43,000 individual supporters around the country. And we've been hosting town halls just like this online around the country. This is our fourth one, and we're really excited to do one for WA. I will start by acknowledging the Whadjuk Noongar people, the traditional owners of the city of Perth. And I'll also acknowledge that I'm joining you all from Ngunnawal and Ngambri country here in Canberra. A nice warm day here in Canberra. So to give you a little bit of a sense of how this is going to work, I'm going to give each of our fantastic panelists a bit of an introduction and an opportunity to speak for a few minutes about their plans to tackle Australia's housing crisis. We also have a few questions then to ask on behalf of the campaign. Those questions are based on our election roadmap, which was released last year. That roadmap in turn was based on Australia's first People's Commission into Australia's housing crisis, which was based on input from about 1,500 average Australians around the country and 200 organisations who work with them. And then we'll get into some audience questions. I'm keen to make sure we have some good time for that. We've been getting really great audience questions in each of these sessions. And we hope to wrap up at 1 o'clock sharp. If you do have a question, please pop it in the Q&A. That's going to be a lot easier for us than managing raised hands. I should say we are going to be recording this session, and we do have a couple of journalists joining us today. We've got Courtney and Katrina from the ABC joining us, and we've also got Jacinta from WA today. So it's a great turnout today. We're expecting some more folks to join us, but I will kick us off first by going to Patrick Gorman MP. Patrick, could you please speak a little bit about what you're seeing across your electorate, but also how the government, the Labor government, I should say, or our Labor representative today, is responding to Australia's housing crisis and what your plans might be to tackle it in a second term?
Thanks, Maiy, and if I can join you in acknowledging the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and pay respects to First Nations people and their lands across Western Australia. I also want to say thanks to the Everybody's Home team for organising today. This is a really important conversation, and it's great to be able to bring together, as you do, those who work in the housing and homelessness sectors with community members who are really passionate, like myself, about making sure that we do make sure that fundamental right of a place to call home, a secure place of shelter, is something that is available to more and more, and ideally every Australian. But if I first address those from the sector who are joining us, I've seen the work that you do firsthand. I've seen it at St Bart's in my electorate, helping particularly older men get back on their feet. That was something that was funded by the Labor government in the wake of the global financial crisis. I've seen it at the Rua Women's Hub in Northbridge, which it was an honour to be out for the opening last year, something that had great state and federal government collaboration, but also huge investment from the philanthropic sector, recognising that there's everyone can play a role in trying to make sure that we have that secure housing for people. I've toured the Common Ground facility here with Minister Claire O'Neill. I've door-knocked the extensive public housing, affordable housing and Homes West housing in my electorate, and at times had the honour to help people get things fixed where they have been not particularly happy with their landlord, even if that is indeed a level of government. And as soon as this is concluded, I'll be joining Foundation Housing, go and meet with tenants at the Perth Hub. Again, something that we have funded through the Housing Australia Future Fund. Now, if you don't know what the Perth Hub is, that's the big apartment building next to RSE Arena. And within it are 37 homes funded by the Housing Australia Future Fund, something that didn't exist just 3 years ago. And if I can take all of that down to the personal, just for one moment, I'm Patrick Gorman. I have the joy of being both the federal member for Perth, as well as being the Assistant Minister to the Prime Minister. But before any of that, I'm the son of someone who grew up in public housing. My dad and his mum, Pat, grew up in Subiaco. Pat was the single mum, raising my dad in the late 50s, early 60s, at a time where it was not easy being a single parent. It's still difficult being a single parent, but public housing was there to support them. And so for my entire life, we've had the idea that government has a role, that government can intervene in our housing markets to make sure that people can get the support they need so that we can make sure that everyone has a secure place to call home. I've had the joy of working in the Rudd government in the wake of the global financial crisis when we had things such as the National Rental Affordability Scheme. And I saw in 2014 when that got axed, closed, ended in the first budget of the Abbott government. So I know that governments make a difference. I know that the decisions we make in Canberra have a real world impact here in Perth. And one of the things that I've learned in my time, one of the things I'm really proud to share with everyone who joins on this discussion, I think we've got 57 participants now. I'm sure there'll be a few more who join. One of the things I'm really proud of as the local member for Perth is I've never opposed a housing development in my electorate. I've never opposed the idea that future tenants who want to live in this great part of the world should have a right to do so. I think that one of the things that is really difficult is that people do see at times the opposition to housing being the dominant conversation rather than looking at what can we do to get more people into home ownership and more people into more secure rentals. I think I'm going to get a bit of a chance later to talk more about some of Labor's plans, but if I do it in really simple terms now, and we'll come back to it later, I just want to say we do want to make it easier to buy and better to rent and make sure that we're building more homes so that those things are possible. We've got plans to make sure that you can have both lower deposits and lower mortgages for those who want to buy, as well as looking at what we can do. We have to work with the states and territories on this, but when it comes to renters' protections, making sure we do more for longer leases and stronger protections for renters so that people have the power to make their rental place their own home. And we also know that no matter whether people want to buy or rent, we have to build more. That's been the focus for us for the first term. It'll continue being the focus if we have the honour of forming government after the next election. And if I can just end where I started, which is to say, government does a lot. Government has a responsibility to step up to the table. I've believed that my entire life. But we can't do it without partners. We can't do it without states and territories. We can't do it without local government ticking the box, saying, yes, build more here. And we can't do it without the people who actually deliver these services to individuals every day, be they in the housing sector, the homeless sector, or the broader social sector. A huge thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for kicking us off. And if, I am sorry that a few people missed what you were saying because we've just had another 10 or so people join as you've been speaking, but I'm sure we'll get more opportunity. And although we don't have a coalition representative here, we are going to ask a few questions and get into some of the things that they're proposing as well. Kate, can I hand over to you? Kate Chaney is the independent member for Curtin, to speak to us a little bit about some of the things you're seeing on the ground, some of the things you're hearing from your constituents, and some of the things you'd like to see happen in the next term of Parliament.
Thank you very much, Maiy, and thanks for having me. It's great to see some familiar names in the attendee list from my time in the sector at Anglicare WA. And I also want to acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people. Now, I left Anglicare WA 3 years ago and became the federal member for Curtin, and now I'm looking at the housing challenge from a different perspective. And along with cost of living struggles, housing affordability and availability is now the #1 issue that's raised with me when I ask my electorate about what worries them the most, and that's in a relatively wealthy electorate. I hear again and again that young Australians are struggling to afford to buy or rent a home, and homeowners can see how hard it will be for their kids and grandkids. So even those not personally affected often raise it with me. Now, I think it's taken about 20 years of policy from both sides of politics to get where we are. Now, housing is half as affordable as it was when compared to wages. So 20 years ago, house prices were 3 to 4 times the average income. Now it's 7 to 8 times. And this has been driven by policy settings from both sides of politics. Rising property prices are politically popular, but exacerbate inequality. So increasing housing supply is essential, and we need to do more to achieve it. Now, because I'm a community independent and I answer only to my community, I've spent a lot of time listening and discussing and talking to people in my electorate about the housing crisis, and also spent time checking with experts like economists and planning experts to see what they think should be done. And so based on all that work, we've just recently produced our Curtin housing policy paper, which you can get on our on my website if you want one. We held 2 community housing forums and had 180 people there. We brought together a mix of renters, homeowners and mortgage holders, and identified the top 3 issues and the top 3 goals for housing in Curtin. And then went through with a panel of experts and evaluated the ideas that the community had produced. And I've also held a good infill forum to discuss the role of medium density housing and how we can do it well. We've got a bit of a reputation as being anti-infill, but I think it's all about how do we actually create livable, walkable communities with urban greening and tree canopy that people actually want to live in. And so we did all of that, and people really said they want politicians and governments to stop the political point scoring and just work together towards solving housing. In the short term, we need to properly resource homelessness services. And having worked at Anglicare, I've seen the pressure that these services are under, and it's not getting any easier. When homelessness services are having to close their doors or not answer calls, and we know we're in trouble. So properly funding those is vital. But that equates to the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. We need those services there, but we also need to do the tougher, longer term work to build the fence at the top of the cliff. So beyond the crisis services, effective housing policy, I think, comes down to 2 issues. How many homes are available and who gets them? And we need to increase the supply of houses, but we also need to make sure that it's fairer. And I'm going to just run you through very quickly the list of 14 policies that we think are worth pursuing. I'll be really quick, Maiy, I promise. And we need to really have some strong political will. These require state and federal government and local working together. Firstly, policies that increase housing supply, boosting government investment in social and affordable housing, more infill done in a sustainable way that builds communities we want to live in, attracting more workers to the housing construction sector, slowing down infrastructure spending so we're not competing for housing workers, encouraging smaller homes to better match population needs, encouraging better use of vacant homes, replacing stamp duty with a broad-based land tax, reducing home building costs through increased construction industry productivity, and creating a level playing field for home buyers by reforming negative gearing and the capital gains tax discount. And then just a few ideas also on making housing fairer for renters, because there's a whole generation of people who will struggle to buy a house. Improve security of tenure for renters, encouraging institutional investment in build to rent, increasing Commonwealth rent assistance, reinstating the National Rental Affordability Scheme, and encouraging the renting out of spare bedrooms are some ideas there. So that requires governments working together. I'd like to see all these approaches being pursued because there isn't a silver bullet here, and we need to take the good ideas from wherever they come from. So they're the policies that I'm focused on trying to promote in the federal parliament, but also promote public acceptance of those ideas for state and local government to get on board with. Thanks, Maiy.
Thanks so much for that, Kate. Very, very comprehensive snapshot and look into your thinking. And I'll now hand over to Jordon Steele-John, who is a Senator for Western Australia representing the Australian Greens, to tell us a little bit about some of the things that you're seeing and the things you're focused on doing. I know the Greens have already announced some housing initiatives for the next election.
Thanks so much, my friend, and hello everybody. Great to be here with you today. Thank you so much for the invite to be part of this conversation. And I want to begin by acknowledging that I'm chatting to you as the Green Senator from WA on unceded First Nations land on Noongar Whadjuk, and I want to pay respect to elders past and present. Always vital to do that, particularly though when we talk about housing, because we're not only engaging in a conversation about land and about the experience of community ownership or barriers to access of ownership of land, which is inherently a conversation where we need to centre First Nations voices, but also to acknowledge the reality that the housing crisis that we have right now is failing so many members of our community. The intersection of the housing crisis with the various crises often driven by discrimination experienced by First Nations people is often one of the toughest intersections to exist at in this conversation and in the community right now. My name is Jordon. My pronouns are he, him, and it's an absolute pleasure to share with you a bit of the Greens' vision to tackle this housing crisis online, as we are with some fabulous people who have spent their lives and careers trying to work to fix this system and support people that are experiencing housing insecurity and working to solve those underlying policy problems that are causing so many to go without safe and decent places to live. Like so many of you in your organisations, the Greens have been listening intensely to the community, and we are hearing really clearly that so many people are struggling right now with the cost of living crisis. And it is so much more than simply a soundbite that gets on the nightly news. It is a lived, struggled reality, whether it is people trying to find the money to actually afford food when they need to do a shop, whether it is the access barriers to healthcare, so many of which are to do with cost and a Medicare system with so many gaps in it, and of course, housing, where we can see in WA, not only entire generations locked out effectively of the prospect of ever having a safe home of their own, that it is something that maybe they own, or ever having the security of a rental situation that is sustainable and affordable for them, but also as a disabled person. Every single time organisations like Anglicare do their fabulous work and survey the housing situation and the rental situation here in Western Australia, they identify one continual theme. If you have access to the disability support pension as a WA citizen, you are unable to afford a single house on the market at an affordable rate every single time. Sometimes it's one, but then it goes back to zero again. That is totally unacceptable. In response to that community experience, the Greens have put forward a number of specific plans. Firstly, in the rental space, to cap rents at 2% for the next 2 years, to freeze them at 2% for the next 2 years, and then to cap them at 2% every year after that, to establish a national renters' rights and protection authority, to phase out the tax breaks that so many of us know are supercharging the housing crisis right now, and to use that money, to reinvest that money in a publicly owned property developer that would build affordable homes that were actually able to be bought or able to be rented in a sustainable long-term way. If we do all of those things in combination with making it much, much harder for the big banks to rip you off when you take out a mortgage with them, and provide people with access to a basic affordable mortgage keeper loan option, where people could actually get a mortgage at no higher than 1% of the RBA's rate, then we believe that we can actually solve this housing crisis. And we've got a good track record from the last Parliament, together with so many of your organisations lobbying, negotiating, pushing. We were able to secure an additional $3 billion investment in public and community housing, and an additional $500 million in upgrades to affordable housing as well. As a disabled person, I'll push my luck and just say this one final thing. I'm really proud that we were able to get an amendment to the HAF legislation, not often talked about, which required that all buildings built under the HAF are built to Silver Standard Access compliance. That will mean for so many people, they can literally get in the door of anything that is built under that program, and I'm really excited to see that roll out. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I think that's three really interesting and actually pretty different perspectives for us to feed off, and I think we'll have some great questions and answers A couple of questions have already come through in the questions, and I should say you don't need to save them. So if you've got questions coming through, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A now. Now, I want to start because we don't actually have a representative of the opposition here with us today. But we do know that their flagship election announcement on housing is superannuation for housing, where people can access some of their superannuation balance and put it towards a home deposit. They're also proposing repealing the Housing Australia Future Fund. And I'm keen to get a few reflections on those. I think we might start with you, Patrick, but also happy to have Jordon and Kate weigh in if there's anything you want to add.
Thank you very much for that, and just to thank Kate and Jordon for their contributions as well. For me, on the super for housing idea, it's obviously been around for quite a while now. It was an idea that former Prime Minister Morrison took to the last election, although I think it tells you something that idea was released with not a lot of time between the announcement and the election, knowing that it doesn't stand up to a lot of scrutiny. What we've seen in recent times is there's been reports out showing us that this policy, which if I can explain the coalition's policy in simple terms, I understand it's allowing people to access sort of $50,000 from their superannuation to invest in a home deposit. But the research is now telling us that it might push up the price of houses by $70,000 or more. So you're going to have a policy that is only going to make the problem we're trying to fix even worse. And it doesn't do anything to contribute on the supply side. What our government spent the last 3 years doing is trying to focus really in a really disciplined way, because there's a lot of ideas and there's a lot of need, but in a really disciplined way around supply. And I think that's where this particular policy falls down. Now, I'm a Labor member of Parliament, so you'd expect me to say all of that. I'll put it in these terms. Sol Estlake and Alan Kohler, who are two very respected Australian economists and have probably done more for economics education in Australia than many others in this country, described the coalition's super for housing policy as, quote, one of the worst policy decisions of the 21st century. Compare that to what they said about Labor's Housing Australia Future Fund, quote, one of the best. Ultimately, what this does is rob people's future rather than build it. And there are better ways. Working on things like Help to Buy, really practical stuff where we can actually help people through the government's balance sheet, as Western Australia has been doing for some 30 years, helping some 120,000 people into their own homes through what we know here in WA is Key Start. These are much more practical ways, and they avoid people finding themselves with potentially a home that's more expensive than they need it to be, and less super when they get to that time in their lives where they need to rely on that income. I think most people recognise that super has a purpose. Super's purpose is to help people have a good and fulfilling retirement and to make sure that we have more support for people in their later years. I think there's been a lot of different ideas where people want to spend super. I think at different times we've had people want to use super to help victims of domestic violence escape their homes. We've had people suggest that you could use super to fund medical costs. We've had people suggest you could use super for housing. I think it's time for the raids on superannuation to stop. It's got a purpose. It's about saving for the future and for retirement. I think that, and I also acknowledge that not everyone has, in those early years of their life, not everyone has a particularly large super balance. That's why we should find more universal ways of increasing supply and increasing access for housing. And I really, I do have a level of disappointment that this is the only idea that's been put on the table by the coalition. And at the same time, it's combined with promises of some pretty deep cuts, including cuts to the Housing Australia Future Fund.
I might just add there, Maiy, it just doesn't work. And I talked about two types of housing policies, one that means we've got more houses and the other that changes the order of who gets the houses. This won't create more houses. It slightly changes the order, but it throws more fuel on the fire. So it means there's more money competing for the same number of houses, which is what drives prices up. And the evidence also shows that, you know, the median superannuation balance of singles and couples aged between 25 and 34, who at that stage, maybe at that stage where they're really keen to buy a house, is like 20,000 per individual and 45,000 per couple. They don't have the money anyway, so it's not really going to fix the problem for the people who need it. And it doesn't address, it makes intergenerational equity worse. So it means that you then have less money when it comes to retirement, and that money has been used on your house. So it doesn't solve the problem. I'd love to see some better thought out policy coming from the Coalition on Housing, because they talk about the problem a lot, but we're not seeing very many solutions.
I'd just add there, I mean, I guess I feel quite, I very much identify with the deep exasperation that so many people in the community feel right now when they look, maybe, you know, for some reason they've finally been forced to do the Google exploration of what the different parties are talking about in the run up to this election, and then they find announcements like this from a party that wants to be, you know, have the prime ministership after the election, and just imagine what it is like for somebody that is trying to scrape together, maybe somehow you've achieved it, you kind of $70,000. I don't know how you would kind of amass that amount of money now, but that's kind of in the range of what you'd need for a deposit, right? And then you're already in a situation where 3 months down the line, that maybe doesn't get you in the door anymore with the amount of money that you would need to have a home of your own. And then you've got an announcement that would effectively make that situation worse. Not only would you be creating an avenue where people would be draining their super, the little super that they have built up, but it would arguably increase the price of housing because of the way that it would drive demand for housing. And then really, if you were to turn around and look back at the Parliament and go, what else is coming out of it from the other side of politics, whether it is red or blue, we're actually in a situation where for the last 30 years, the Parliament has churned out or sustained, particularly tax policy, that has made this situation so much worse in maintaining negative gearing and capital gains tax exemptions. And the thing that really gets a lot of people is if you look at the personal disclosures of so many MPs, we're talking about people that own multiple homes. The average home number owned by a member of the federal parliament is about 2.5 houses. So literally the system that's meant to be solving this is stacked up with folks that benefit materially from the continuation of the very policies that are making this situation so much harder for people.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, one of the things that's been a bit disappointing is we haven't had coalition representatives at these town halls, but it does seem like super for housing is a fairly friendless measure based on some of the Q&As we've had with people around the country, and I think people are skeptical that having an extra $20,000 or $30,000 in your pocket when you go to an auction is going to do very much for you if everyone else also has that money in their pocket as well. We've got a couple of questions coming through in the chat about tax. People are noting that economists like Alan Kohler have recommended reforms to investor tax breaks. That's something you've mentioned, Jordon, and Kate, you've also touched a little bit on tax. At our People's Commission last year, we did hear evidence about how tax concessions for investors have pushed up housing costs. And we've also heard the government rule out acting on this issue. Should the federal government take another look at tax reform? Kate, we might start with you on this one first.
Sure. I think absolutely. And I think it's a real problem that we've reached gridlock on tax reform because everyone's too scared to say the word. Now, there are different ways that you could reform capital gains tax and negative gearing to protect decisions that people have made in the past, but also to limit it to what's reasonable. And we could look at limiting it to a particular dollar amount or a particular number of houses or only new builds, or there's a whole lot of different ways we can do it. Let's at least start having that conversation. And even in Curtin, where you'd think that we probably have a disproportionate number of people who are investors, when we did a survey saying which of these ideas do people support, 3/4 of survey respondents said that they would support reviewing the tax settings to make and looking at negative gearing and capital gains tax discounts. So I think we need to break this gridlock on reform and break the taboo of even talking about tax and have a conversation to say what's housing for, and how do we create the settings that actually mean it's being used for people to live in rather than as an investment product.
Thanks for that, Kate. And just to echo what you've said, our campaign also released some polling last month, which included some polling from WA, which showed that people are either wanting to see governments take a look at tax reform, or at least are open to it. Patrick, I might go to you next. I know that Labor did take this to a couple of elections, and I know that there's not a ton of appetite to look at again. What would it take for the government to look at this again?
Well, I think, similar to Kate, I mean, I've had a lot of conversations with my community because I have stood at elections saying I want to investigate these in more detail. The feedback time and time again is that this is not something that's going to be able to get broad consensus and fast action. And what I've chosen to do is to support the sort of measures that we've taken, which is to sort of go, well, there's a lot of things that affect demand and supply for housing. Tax is one part of that puzzle, but equally the other areas of zoning, making sure that we've got enough construction workers and capacity in the construction sector, skilled labour, interest rates, a whole range of these things factor into that mix. The one that the government had a clear path and mandate to act on was to invest more in supply. That's what we've chosen to do, because we can get more investment into supply. And if I just think about my experience of the last few years, even in trying to make sure that there's a more sensible tax environment for build to rent, that was quite a struggle just to get something that was about getting more supply in. We had a big struggle in the Parliament just to get a more sensible tax system there. And that's why the bulk of our $32 billion plan is about investing in supply. You've got it in the Housing Australia Future Fund. You've got it in the build to rent programs. You've got it in terms of what we've done through National Cabinet and getting better long-term and more secure rentals for renters. We've got it in the Help to Buy scheme. And even the Home Guarantee scheme has helped an additional 150,000 Australians into home ownership. And so I think there's always going to be discussions about the nature and shape of our tax system. And I think that's, discussing the Australian economy is one of the things I really enjoy in my role as a Member of Parliament. But we've chosen to focus our energy where we could get the most action as fast as possible. And that was by putting the Commonwealth back into having a responsibility on the supply side. What we know is there was a decade where that wasn't the view. The Commonwealth didn't have a view on, the Commonwealth didn't have a responsibility for supply, that simply supply would be dealt with through demand. What we saw coming out of the pandemic was that there was an unmet demand and not enough action to help with on the supply side. That's where we've put our focus. I'm always comfortable having the discussions about other policy proposals, but I'm also really comfortable defending why we chose to prioritise supply for the last 3 years.
And Jordon, I do want to throw to you as well, because I know the Greens have really been pushing tax reform in this last term.
Look, I think one of the wonderful things that organisations like Everyone's Home and your members throughout WA and across the country do in these conversations is you work to ground these types of debates in the lived reality of the lived experience. And whenever I think about these types of conversations around tax reform, I go back to, among other things, what what did we find on census night in 2021? When we kind of looked at the WA community and asked the question, how many folks were experiencing homelessness? And the answer to that question is that about 10,000 people across our community were experiencing homelessness, and nearly 2,000 of those folks were children. Right? That is unacceptable. That is not okay. That is, every single one of those people represents a profound failure of people in positions of power to do the job that they're sent to those spaces to do. And I am sure that when you sit down with internal political strategists and pollsters and people that spend time thinking about the political zeitgeist, that this is framed as an issue which is, you know, a tough one to crack, but it is nowhere near as tough as actually living without a home, as actually sleeping on the street, as actually not knowing where you will be able to live next month, or whether you will be able to feed your kids because of what's happened to interest rates. Like, I think often politicians in these conversations are coddled, quite coddled, as though the difficulty of those conversations are anything like the difficulty of that lived experience. So I think we've got a really excellent moment at the next election for the community to join together and go, no, actually, we want something a bit better. We don't want $176 billion, and that's the cost of these tax structures over the next decade, to be sent into the pockets of property investors. We actually want that money invested in giving everyone a safe roof over their head.
All right, thank you for that. So again, we've got three very different perspectives coming through. We're taking a bit of time, and I do want to move through some of these audience questions. You've all touched at different times on the issue of social housing, and we've got a question here from Carly. I understand the amount of government-owned social housing has been sold off and substantially reduced in the last 30 years. This is a really big plank of Everybody's Home's election roadmap. Social housing is a really integral part of the solution from our perspective. And one of the key elements of our roadmap is really boosting social housing. Back when we had very affordable housing in Australia, many more different kinds of people in Australia had access to social housing. Jordon, what are the Greens' plans in this area? I might throw to you first on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of tackling this issue, I think you've got to, like in my experience, you've got to look at it across the entire housing piece, because as everybody online knows, if you've got a set of housing policies that are driving people towards a need to be on the public housing waiting list, for example, it makes it so much harder to close that overall waiting list gap and wait times that we see. So of course, policies such as our position on freezing and then capping rents and establishing stronger renters' rights protections have a kind of preventative measure if we look at the overall waiting list and how do we get that down. But specifically in the space of actually building more affordable homes for people, we've been really clear. We see a massive role for government in this space, actually to not only step up and directly provide additional funding to build many more public and affordable homes, much like the way that we did after the Second World War. And, you know, like government used to do this and then kind of got out of this space and made way for the private sector. But also for the Commonwealth to get a bit braver when it comes to its conversations with the states and territories and the requirements on them if they want to access federal funds. Like the Commonwealth should be very, very clear and willing to use what is quite substantial leverage as the national government to be encouraging and compelling the states to do the right things when it comes to renters' rights and protections, and when it comes to ensuring that rents in their jurisdictions are affordable. I really get quite tired of this Commonwealth state. No, it's your responsibility. No, it's your responsibility. Like, actually, everyone has a responsibility, and the Commonwealth often has the biggest voice in the room, and we should use it.
Patrick, I might come to you now. Can you see a scenario where the government, the federal government, or a federal Labor government, I should be more specific, can scale up social housing and really make it an option for more Australians?
I think that is exactly what we're doing, is giving more funds to the states and territories to expand their social housing stock. It is not a role the Commonwealth has played, and there are a range of constitutional and other barriers as to why the Commonwealth is not traditionally the owner of housing stock across the nation. And I think we've got to be careful. I respect Jordon in sort of the frustration that can exist when it comes to the state and federal divide, but I think there are obviously responsibilities that the Commonwealth has, and that is primarily a funding responsibility. And there are responsibilities that the states and territories have, and that is primarily an operating. They also have a responsibility to invest in social housing, and they have a responsibility when it comes to the planning laws that sometimes are some of the biggest restrictions. So I don't think we can sort of say, oh, well, we've got to end the blame game. What we've got to do is actually be clear about whose responsibilities sit where, and also be honest. Like, I think Carly was right in saying that there have been, in some areas, too much sell-off of public housing stock. That's one of the reasons that we're now investing in all of this additional housing stock as the Albanese government. What I'd like to see is that we do continue to invest in more, continue to invest in maintenance. I've seen at times where the maintenance hasn't been kept up to a standard that any renter, whether they be in public or private rentals, you have a right to expect a standard of maintenance, and if that's not met, then I'd encourage, and I do encourage, particularly those in social and affordable housing, to have as high a standard as they would if they were in a private rental. I think we are also, though, turning the corner when it comes to having more stock. I understand why sometimes governments will change the stock that they have, but I do expect that the number of houses that any state or territory has in their social housing stock is going up, not down, particularly when we're giving them significant amounts of Commonwealth taxpayer dollars to do exactly that.
I would just add, I don't think people care whether it's the responsibility or the federal government or the state government. They just want to see it done. And we as politicians need to get together and work out how to do that. So in 1982, 14 out of every 100 new builds was social housing. Now it's 1.7. And so we've got to look at that and say the government does have a role to play here. The Housing Australia Future Fund, the Housing Accord, there's a model that we can build on, and I'd love to see greater investment in that, because I think it is one of the fundamental things that people expect that we can get right as a country.
Fantastic. Couldn't agree more. We're taking some time to get through each question. I'm just tossing up about whether we have time to get to some of these other questions, or whether we go to kind of our final question. I might go to our final question and invite each of you to also add a final reflection in that. So a lot of the changes that we've been talking about today are big, and a lot of the changes that everybody's home are asking for are pretty big. We're asking for a very large scale investment in social housing. We're asking for some changes to renters' rights that are very popular with some people, but not necessarily popular with everyone. And we're obviously asking for tax reform changes that have been at this stage ruled out by both the government and the opposition. And so I guess our question to each of you is, what do you need to see from a campaign like ours, and what do you need to see happening in the community to create space for these big changes that we need to see to fix the housing crisis? I might start, Patrick, with you.
I think we need to, one of the things that has changed over my time in Parliament, that's 6 years, one of the things that has changed is that we are talking about this more and more, and that's a conversation we've got to find ways to bring people into, rather than say, you've got different views, please let's not talk. And that's why I think forums like this are so important, because it's actually about saying, while there's different opinions on the way forward, there is a collective will to do more when it comes to housing. I am going to come back and say, we do need to equally have asks on state governments, territory governments, and local governments. Yes, we have to work together, and I am up for that, but it's the only way that we're going to get real movement. Because if it's just one level of government pushing, we will only achieve 1/3 of what is possible. So that's one thing I'd encourage the Everybody's Home campaign to do, is to reach out at those state, territory, and local government levels as well. My broader reflection, though, is that the expectation of the Australian people that the Commonwealth Government re-engages in the housing space is very high, and that is a really good thing that has changed. That expectation did not exist 6 or 7 years ago. It simply didn't. The Commonwealth had massively withdrawn for investment in housing, and that had kind of been socially acceptable. I don't think that could happen again, and I think that's a good thing. But what I also think is that if you look at what, and I'm proud of what our government's been able to do, and even in build to rent, it's just one example. There's 80,000 more homes in the housing pipeline because of build to rent. 80,000 homes that wouldn't have been in that pipeline had we not changed the laws just a year ago. So I'd really encourage people to look for, to grab the momentum that's there, to grab the fact that there is now this big public conversation. This has been fantastic. I look forward to talking about housing a lot more over the course of this campaign, but more importantly, in the years ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pat. Kate, I might go to you, and then we can end with Jordon.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think if you look at the tax question, it gives some good insight into what's needed. And a big part of it is normalising the discussion. And I think we get this gridlock and are unable to do anything because politically parties have been made to rule in, rule out stuff, and then are not able to change their position. Creating an expectation from community that these are the problems that people have an appetite to solve is really important. So normalising it, removing the stigma, finding unlikely allies in that campaign as well, I think is really useful, because we need to give the parties both pressure and cover to be thinking longer term and with bolder solutions. And then also hold your MP to account, speak to your MP and say, what are you personally doing on this issue? And your MP should be able to say, this is what I'm doing. So, ultimately that's how a democracy works. And continuing to have that conversation and create that pressure is what will ultimately drive change.
Well, I think in terms of the campaign so far, I'm really impressed by what you've managed to achieve so far, and I think it should never be underestimated the value of having such succinct, clear ways forward presented as this is actually the solution, because it refocuses the conversation and enables us to actually go, okay, well, here's some solutions. And in this case, many of them that you're putting forward have been part of the conversation for literally decades. You're giving us a latest version of an ongoing conversation. So if there is community demand for action and there are clear solutions that are being advocated, then what is the barrier? And I think what people are increasingly concluding is that the barrier is political. This isn't one of those devilish questions where we just don't quite have a solution yet, and those problems do exist, and they need to be explored properly. But this is one where we know pretty clearly what is the cause of the housing crisis. What are the policy settings at the national level that are making it worse? Where are the opportunities to make it better? Like, we know those things. So I think there's two things from the campaign going forward. One is continuing to create that clarity and that sense of pressure upon both Labour and the Liberal Party to actually join the community where they are in the need for action, and also to highlight the stories, the lived stories of people that are actually struggling right now with the crisis, that are actually trying to figure out how they pay their rent, how they pay their mortgage, because that helps round the convo in reality. I'm really quite excited about what the community may together be able to deliver at this election. I think a lot of people are disenfranchised with both Labour and the Liberals, and that often leads to a parliament where people have got to work together. They call it a minority parliament, they call it a power sharing parliament, but actually what it is nobody gets to just ram anything through. You've got to talk it through, you've got to collaborate, you've got to discuss, and in many ways I think that's the solution to this impasse. We need a parliament where the balance of power is held by the Greens and others who are willing to sit down and go, right, well, if you want to continue to have the nice shiny offices, you've actually got to engage on these issues and join the community where they are. I think we can do that together on election day.
That's a fantastic note for us to end on. We had so many questions that we just couldn't get to. It did take us about 10 to 15 minutes to get through each question. So I was tossing up about whether we could squeeze in one more, but we do need to let our panelists out by 1 p.m. sharp because you're all busy people and you've got other things to get to. So I do want to say thank you so much for giving us your time. I want to say thank you to everyone who came and participated in the conversation today. The questions were really outstanding, and I'm sorry we didn't get to them. All some great questions there about things like the housing and homelessness plan, prefabricated and manufactured housing, all sorts of things that we didn't get to touch on today, unfortunately. But I do want to say thanks to you all. One of the things that's been really exciting about each of these town halls, but especially this one today, is social housing is a really key plank of the Everybody's Home campaign, and expanding it so that it's an option for more people. The last question that we got is someone who's on a higher single income and isn't eligible for social housing. Our dream in this campaign is to make social housing an option for more people. And it's great that I think we've actually got some good agreement among today's panelists that that's a good idea, but maybe some different ideas about the mechanisms and how we get there. So thank you so much for your time. We'll end it there. And if anybody has any other thoughts or queries for the campaign, please feel free to flick us an email, and we'll be uploading the video from today's town hall onto our YouTube. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you very much. Thanks to everyone who tuned in.